Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how I painted this loose landscape. We've got a wet in wet sky with clouds threatening rain, distant mountains, a lake, a grassy bank in the foreground, and the lake is edged with trees. But first, I'm really happy to let you know that my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner, is available to purchase from most good online bookstores in the UK and to pre-order in other parts of the world. Right, so that's my book promotion out of the way. Let's get on with the demo. I've sketched the scene out really loosely, just the mountains and the trees on this side of the lake. I'm going to paint it wet in wet, so I'm going to wet my sky, leaving a few dry patches for clouds. If you look carefully, you can see where the water is. It looks slightly greyish. So I'm scrubbing the water on with a large wash brush. It's my Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch mottler, but any large wash brush will do. And now I'm wetting the lake area using horizontal brush strokes. This is a little bit of raw sienna. This will give me a little bit of light in the sky when I add my dark clouds. Now I'm going to add really dark, rich, almost tube consistency Payne's grey. This will lighten up and thin out quite a lot as I spread it across the sky, working around lighter areas to leave some cloud shapes. Everything will soften and diffuse because I'm working wet into wet. There are a few areas of dry paper which will give me some slightly harder edges, but I'm going for a really soft sky here. The sky will lighten back quite considerably as it dries. Once I get to the mountains, I'm painting over the mountains because they will be darker, so I can paint through them. And now I'm going to increase the colour in my lake. And I've added a little bit of Winsor Blue red shade and Cobalt Blue to my Payne's grey. Now using horizontal brush strokes in order to keep the lake flat, and then introducing a bit more of the grey as I come closer to the foreground. Where it's a little bit strong, I can just lift out the paint with a damp brush. So there's just a bluish tinge to the lake. I'm now going to create my trees, painting wet in wet, and I'm using a richer, drier mix of green. My green is sap green today, mixed with some raw umber and a bit of burnt umber, and also a little bit of the Winsor Blue. Using this drier mix, I can position my trees according to my pencil outline, just using very loose brush strokes to give the suggestion of those trees, and then a big sweep of paint across the foreground, sap green, raw sienna, raw umber, and a little bit of the blue. This will give me the suggestion of my grassy bank in front of the trees and the lake. I don't need any detail here because I just want the viewer to be led into the painting across the grass, and then to the trees, the lake, and eventually the mountains that I'm going to paint in a bit later. And now adding some shadows underneath the trees using the tips of my brush and burnt umber and a bit of Payne's grey. This is my palette knife and I'm using it to scrape through the rich paint of the trees, and this will give me some lighter trunks and branches. I'll work around these later once everything's dry with darker paint, but if I get these highlights in to start with, I find it gives me lots more depth and dimension to these suggested trees. So some of them look paler, some of them look highlit, etc. You can of course leave this stage out and put all of your branches and trunks in painted wet on dry in the second stage if you prefer. And I'm happy with that for the first layer. I now need to leave it all to dry completely. So here's the dry painting. You can see that the sky has lightened quite considerably. Payne's grey always seems to dry much lighter. There's a big drying shift, so it's important to sort of go in a little bit darker than you would expect. This Payne's grey that I'm using here is Winsor & Newton Professional Artists Quality Paint. I find it is the best paint to make a lovely grey sky with. I'm using my size 14 Escoda Perla round brush to paint in the headland just in front of the mountains. I've mixed up a fairly dark colour for this. I think it might be a bit too dark, but I can knock that back in a minute. And this is my nearer headland, which has been mixed from sap green, Payne's grey, burnt umber, raw umber, and then I'll add a bit of blue and lighten up the mixture here and there to paint in the distant mountains. And then the mountains that are even further back, I'll use a much paler, softer colour, and this should give me some aerial perspective and depth and distance. So that's my mountains in, and I hope you can see how varying the value of paint that I've used for each section of the mountains. I've created depth and distance. I'm now using my small rigger brush and my dark mixture of Payne's grey with some burnt umber in it to paint in some darker tree trunks and branches. I'm working around the marks that I scraped in earlier into the damp paint, painting over them in places, building up a tangle of branches and trunks, trying to keep it balanced across the whole painting, but without overdoing it. You can use any small brush for this. I like to use the rigger for these branches because it's got quite long hairs, and so the long hairs hold a lot of paint. So not only can you get nice fine lines, and you can sort of keep going and keep your brush strokes fairly sort of spontaneous and free without having to keep dipping into paint too often. Now that I've got my trees looking the way I want them, I've decided I'm going to use the rigger brush on its side to drag a little bit of that dark paint that I used for the tree branches across the base of this nearest headland. By darkening the headland up, it just shows up a little bit more against those paler mountains, again adding to the depth, the illusion of depth and distance. So just a few finishing touches. This is some raw sienna. I'm just dragging that across the unpainted little patches that were there in the tree line, just to blend them in a little bit more. Then I shall glaze some raw sienna across the grass. That will warm it up a bit in places, just to sort of balance out the composition a bit more. And I think that's just about finished. I think I'm going to remove the tape and have a look at it, see how it looks with a clean white border. And doing this lets us see it with fresh eyes, almost as if it was in a mount or framed. Then we can see if we need to make any adjustments to it. I think I could put some cloud shadows in the lake, but I'm not going to because I quite like the simplicity of it at the moment. But if you were to follow along or try something similar, you may want to put some cloud shadows across the lake, which would probably add a bit more interest. I hope you've enjoyed this beginner-friendly tutorial, which of course is suitable for intermediate painters who will probably be able to add a bit more complexity to it. So thank you so much for watching. Please give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and I hope that if you're new to the channel you'd consider subscribing. It's free to do and it really helps with our reach here on YouTube, and if you click on the bell icon you'll be notified every time we post a new video. And many thanks, of course, as always, to our wonderful patrons who support this channel. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.